We often think of places like Amazon or rideshare companies when we think about worker mistreatment or being cheated out of wages. But as writer Owen Higgins suggests, we don't need to look any further than America's favorite pastime. He details players being denied adequate pay and shelter. Some minor league players even resort to sleeping in their cars instead of getting a hotel, or there was a risk that they might have done that, the cost of which would amount to 80% of 2 weeks of pay.
In the minor leagues, baseball players have been mistreated and paid poorly for decades as their teams' rich owners reap the benefits of their work and refuse to pay up despite the low cost of doing so. And according to the article from Owen Higgins in Business Insider that you just saw on the screen, Ryan, is this a good metaphor for what happens actually? I mean, it's beyond a metaphor, there's substance here, of course, but is it actually also a good metaphor for what happens when you see the sort of high profile, the treatment of super high profile executives, when you're looking at high profile Major League Baseball players, not minor league baseball players, but the Major League Baseball players being treated super well. And then everybody kind of forgets that down the line, there's a system that is much less generous.
Well, yes, the American metaphor here is strong in particular because the thing that is keeping people going here is this dream of making it to the big leagues. And even if they do make it to the big leagues, the average career is going to be quite short.
Yeah.
They're going to wind up, late 20s, kind of washed out of baseball, maybe with some savings, maybe not, and now with the rest of their life to figure out what to do. Those are the ones who make it to the big leagues. What's going on in the minor leagues that Owen writes about here is quite a scandal. He talks about the average salary being $15,000 a year, and you might think, oh well, you're only playing from spring till fall. Well, that's almost the whole year, and also then there are obligations around the rest of the time. They're required to participate in spring training and not get paid for it. There are rules that say they don't have to pay them overtime. What he was writing about here is that the Bowie Bay Sox, the team near here, was charging such an exorbitant amount for the hotels on the road that players were like, all right, well then we're just gonna sleep in our cars.
And I think that's probably the better metaphor, is that even just to like the comparison between what's being paid and then the cost of living is setting up this impossible situation. So like where I think baseball is probably exceptional in a lot of these different comparisons or points or extensions of the metaphor, I would say in that case it is a good example of that's like you are not paying people enough to actually do the job. And that is a super important point that we see over and over again. And if you look at places like Amazon, where they have these grueling jobs, and their people are resorting to like urinating in various places during their shifts as delivery drivers because they don't have a lot of time and because they are managed so intensely by things like AI, there are health problems that start to happen. And there are questions of, well, how much is it costing me physically and then financially to actually do this job versus what I'm making? Is it actually more expensive for me to have the job than what I'm being, compensated? Right,
and the government is helping the owners out here because not only do they exempt the baseball from antitrust, but they then create this situation that's called a monopsony. A monopoly is when there's only one seller of a thing, and so they can charge whatever price they want. What the government has created is a monopsony, which is just one buyer of a thing. So if you want to play baseball, you basically have one place that you can go to, and that's the minor leagues, and then into the major leagues. And so as a result of that, they can essentially dictate the pay to 99% of the players, which is how you can wind up in a situation where you're getting $15,000 for an average annual take home for a player.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there was an interesting there was a culture war dust-up between the Republican Party and Major League Baseball down in Georgia. And that's when we saw Republicans actually call for the removal of the antitrust protection on Major League Baseball. What did you think of that? I mean, do you think there could be, this is not getting a lot of momentum. A lot of people aren't talking about the monopoly and its effect on the treatment of minor league baseball players. But do you think as Republicans sort of sour on the monopsonies, as you say, and on monopolies, that there could be further action that actually ends up eating into some of these sports leagues.
That it took their peak at losing the All-Star game, which I think was probably a Democratic blunder. We'll see how that plays out.
And it's all about money also.
Well, that it took their annoyance at the All-Star game for them to speak out about the antitrust protection that the league gets is revealing of the seriousness of it. Because they could have said, wait a minute, you have these owners who are doing very little other than taking out large leveraged loans and buying teams and then watching the teams rise in value, and more often than not wrecking these teams, walking away with these massive fortunes. We don't think that the government ought to create this welfare system for these owners. That would have been an entirely reasonable way to interject yourself into this conversation. Instead, they're like, we don't like these woke corporations that are objecting to our voter suppression laws, so therefore we're going to punish them legislatively. That's a little bit less intellectually serious, I'd say.
I think a frustrating thing about this is it also speaks to the way that we approach what is considered or normalized as part-time work. And that's something that plays out a lot in the gig economy. People say, well, you're driving Uber on the side, you're delivering on the side, you're doing this on the side. And that sort of gives them permission. I'm not even talking about legally, just sort of like in the social, in the way that we justify things socially and interpersonally, makes them feel like they have license to treat people in the way that they wouldn't treat full-time workers. And obviously there's an argument for treating part-time and full-time workers differently, but not when it comes to like their dignity as human beings. And I think this also speaks to that, which is something I think we're starting to see play out in a wider scale with the gig economy.
Right. And also in this case, the players don't get much sympathy because so many people are like, you get to play baseball.
Right.
And you would say, I was about to say you get to play baseball for a living, but not really. $15,000 is not a living.
Not at all.
And they talk about how difficult it is for them to afford a place to live because they're constantly moving from one to another. You can't really buy a house, then you're going down to Florida for spring training, and then you're on the road half the year. So it's an awfully difficult life to play before small crowds for like a slim chance of a short career in the majors.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really interesting story, but we'll be back with more Rising right after this.